Hi everyone. I want to read the introduction to a Turkish version of Beauty and the Beast. A traveller, savant, and man of mystery par excellence, my paternal grandfather, the Serdar Iqbal Ali Shah, regarded Istanbul as the greatest city on earth. The first time he visited, in the early 1920s, it was still called Constantinople. Until a handful of years before, that bridge between continents had been a pleasure dome to the Ottoman sultans and capital to their vast empire. Although I was only a small child when my grandfather died, I have always felt the strongest possible connection to him. It's as though we're cut from the same cloth, delighting identically in adventure, in oddity, and in intrigue. Late one night, while working at Dar Khalifa, I was drawn to a tattered old box file in the corner of my library, packed to bursting with my grandfather's notes, papers, and other ephemera. It smelled of another age. As I rummaged through the contents for no particular reason, a crumpled little scrap of paper caught my eye. Opening it out, I found a handwritten message in my grandfather's unmistakable script. It read, "Crabbe's English synonyms. He who searches finds." I sat there for a moment or two, a frown on my face and the note in my hand. Slowly, a stream of memory was activated. I remembered reading an inscription in a heavy, maroon-bound book, a book with that very name, an inscription in the same precise script, written in fountain pen. It had noted how a copy of the book had been left in error in Cairo, and that he had searched for years before finding another one for sale. One of the many books that he'd left to my father decades later, it had been eventually left to me. Putting the box file down, I paced over to the shelf in the library's opposite corner, over there. A moment later, Crabbe's English Synonyms was in my hand. Opening it up, I spotted my grandfather's note. "I cherish this book more highly than any other in the English language," it said. Reading the message, gleaned from the box file a second time, I didn't understand why he would have written a message about that particular book. Still frowning, I carried it over to the pool of light on my desk and flicked through it, taking it in a page at a time. With meticulous care and in soft pencil, my grandfather had marked words he found especially valuable: colossus, stentorian, superannuated, verdant. My frown all the deeper, I shrugged to myself. Then I did something that later surprised even me. Opening the dictionary out, I peered under the spine. To my delight, a long, slim slip of paper was lodged in there. With the end of a pen, I poked it out. My breathing shallow, I held it into the light. Written by the same hand and in the customary blue-black ink he loved, another message provided a cryptic explanation. Rarely have I located one there as I did at the Safalah Bazaar. With my ears, I heard a version of Güzel va Serkin, and that was surely as old as time itself. My grandfather's books often contained coded messages. At one time, I considered rooting through them all in search of clues and starting points of adventure. But the way I saw it, to do it so en masse like that would be wrong. Rather, each clue, each coded message was waiting there for a particular moment and even for a particular person to discover them. The next morning I went back into the library and looked for that long strip of paper, the one I discovered the evening before. As so often happened with my grandfather in his life, I already knew the subjects that piqued his attention, just as I did the places to which he was drawn. Over the years, I'd visited the bazaar in Istanbul that he'd written about, an ancient open-air book market, marveling at the quality and the quantity of books on sale. My research into 1001 Nights had led me to a description of the market by Antoine Galland, the Frenchman credited with discovering the treasury of Alf Layla wa Layla. Naturally, the collection of tales had never needed to be discovered at all, because it was most definitely never lost. But what had interested me was Galland's observation while touring the bazaar in the 1720s that Ottoman customers far preferred handwritten copies of books to printed versions. The fact surprised him, as the copies were so often hard to read compared to the even type of the modern machine-printed editions. After the discovery in Crabb's English synonyms, I found myself thinking about my grandfather a great deal and about the way he would leave the key to an adventure in plain sight. I kept the scrap of paper on my desk and would pick it up and caress it while I worked. That spring, a dear family friend came to stay with me here at Dar Khalifa. His name was Altan, and he was an expert in Ottoman calligraphy, his family having been ancestral booksellers from Istanbul. When I showed him the message, he smiled expansively. Disney has made a wretched animated version of the story of Beauty and the Beast, he said, the words spoken in horror. I looked it up online, I said, and I've read the history of Beauty and the Beast. Altan rolled his eyes. Well, there's the real thing, he told me. There's the real Beauty and the Beast. And then there's Disney's version with no beauty, but just beast. We went through onto the terrace outside the library, and we sat down on sofas, sunshine, shadows, and birdsong filling the courtyard beyond. I mentioned having read the story and knowing that it was hundreds or possibly thousands of years old, and that it predated the French version, a fairy tale by Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve, a contemporary of Galland. My Turkish visitor may have been born and brought up on the European side of Istanbul, but he was most certainly Asian in his mentality. One day, the Europeans will be unmasked for what they are, he told me. And what is that? I said. They're second-rate thieves who are incapable of presenting a thing of wonder in the way that it was intended, he said. Having known Altan all my life, I could sense he was not finished. After a prolonged silence and staring out vacantly into the courtyard's vegetation, he smiled. I grew up with that story, he said, and it certainly was not the Disney version. Would you tell it to me? I asked. There was no need to ask, because Altan had already begun.